Australia's lower lakes are full of fresh water. They shouldn't be. And it's time we all knew the truth. For tens of thousands of years, South Australia's lower lakes were made up of a mixture of river water from the Murray-Darling Basin and seawater that came in through the Murray mouth. But then, 80 years ago, the seawater was cut off by 7 huge man-made barrages, creating these fake freshwater lakes.
The incidence of tidal and freshwater species from 7,000 years ago through to 1930 indicated that Lake Alexandrina was a tidal estuarine system.
They dammed off the biggest estuary in the southern hemisphere, turned it into man-made lakes, freshwater lakes. It's a travesty. We altered the whole system.
It's been an environmental and economic disaster, and most politicians are still lying about what is really happening. I'm standing on the Coorong barrage. This is fresh water and this is ocean water. The South Australians have been calling for more and more water to hold this artificial lake up. It's creating an environmental disaster. To keep the water levels up in these fake lakes, river water was to be constantly taken from farming communities in New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia. That's water that should be used to grow food.
We were watching it run past our front door to satisfy the lower lakes, which were never, ever fresh water.
It's idiotic to try and argue that the lower lakes were anything but estuarine.
For decades, governments and the Murray-Darling Basin Authority have told us that we have to accept this shocking waste of community water. And it's not just water that's being wasted. For so-called environmental flows, the damage these do is in fact destroying the environment. Large dam cold water releases endanger our native fish and cause irreparable erosion.
We're seeing the destruction of the platypus and the kingfisher habitat with all of these flows, and we're seeing erosion and the loss of hundreds of mature red gum trees which have fallen over and into the river. And the proliferation of carp, that's an enormous problem.
Throughout the Commonwealth of Australia, the greatest animal pest of all is the rabbit. Rabbits are there in their tens of millions.
This rabbit of the rivers destroys water quality, causes algal blooms and adds to the degradation of riverbanks. These are the breeding grounds for our endangered platypus.
We're now seeing this proliferation of carp in all our waterholes, in all our lagoons.
And they're invading the lower lakes as well, and they're threatening the entire basin.
The carp have found the relatively freshwater conditions ideal for breeding. Their numbers have escalated massively, and now Lake Alexandrina is a source for reinvasion into the rest of the basin.
In an effort to win the Green vote, the government has in fact conned the Greens into abandoning their policies. The government has tricked the Greens into being complicit in their environmental vandalism.
Right from its inception, the Basin Plan was politically motivated to get the vote of the Greens, the South Australians, who hold the sway of vote in federal parliament.
To find out more, I headed to South Australia to speak with experts, historians, farmers and local Indigenous elders.
We know that we're in a saltwater environment and we know the freshwater meets it.
The first thing you do is you've got to recognise what's happened. And at the moment, the government and everyone's in complete denial. And, fabricating the science, and honestly, you've got to be brain dead if you believe what they're saying.
To be able to send the targeted environmental flows down to the lower lakes, the Murray Mouth and the Coorong, they require 80,000 megs per day at the South Australian border for 5 weeks. They've taken all the water that they possibly can as the low-hanging fruit. You can't get blood out of a stone.
They keep talking about environmental water. We need to get more, we need to pump more down. Well, that's not so.
Politicians continue to lie about the fake lakes, pretending that they were always freshwater lakes, when that just isn't true.
South Australians either don't believe this was ever an estuary because they've been lied to constantly, or they think it's too hard.
But as I discovered, the problem is not too hard to solve. The lower lakes simply have to be returned to their natural state. The seawater from the Murray Mouth needs to be let into the lakes so it can naturally mix with river water, as it was tens of thousands of years ago.
It seems as though we've kind of lost the will, or we're afraid to solve the problem.
And there's too many untruths that are being believed out there, too many good stories being told that's not factual about the river.
Every gigalitre of water that is brought back has a massive social effect on our regional communities.
The creation of the fake lakes is also contributing to the destruction of what should be one of the most beautiful places in the world, the Coorong.
So it has been a mixture of waters for thousands and thousands of years. What's happened though is when the water is stopped, it's caused an environmental problem. We're not getting the normal process that's happened for 60, 80,000 years.
The other factor that's killing the Coorong is this vast network of man-made drains in South Australia, which were built decades ago in order to turn marshland into farming land. The water from this area used to naturally flow into the Coorong, but instead the drains flush that water out to sea.
The South Lagoon of the Coorong has been collapsing ecologically since the 1930s, substantially changed from its natural character on account of diversions from the upper southeast to the ocean.
They think they know more, and that becomes the problem. You got people in Canberra that make a decision for something happening in South Australia.
But for goodness sake, develop an independent mind. Come and have a look at it.
So why are governments so determined to keep South Australia's lower lakes full? Perhaps it's because some of the most powerful and wealthy members of South Australian society have their holiday homes on the lower lakes. They like their water views and their private moorings. Proof that politics and water should never mix.
Policies are the problem and the politicians are the problem because they don't understand what they've legislated.
What's happened is our people had a way of looking after the environment. What's happened by having people who don't understand the environment coming in and making decisions, that's been the problem.
The Coorong needs a major intervention, so tragically, without major intervention, it's lost.
I want to see the government, the federal government in particular, to step in with the Murray-Darling Basin Authority. They're wasting water, they keep sending more water down that's not needed.
This madness has to end for the sake of our farming communities, our fishermen and women, our environment and our Indigenous communities.
We'd see an abundance of life. We'd see ebbs and flows. We'd see water coming and going.
It's time to turn South Australia's fake lakes back into natural lakes, full of a mixture of river water and seawater, the way they were always meant to be.
It would be, I would think, better for the natural ecosystem were it a variable in terms of salinity and variable in terms of water level, natural estuary as it once was.
They don't seem to understand the economic, social and environmental pain they are causing in these areas. And they can't achieve what they call enhanced environmental outcomes down at South Australia and the Lower Murray. They can't achieve those outcomes because to do that, they need to flood the bejesus out of everyone up here.
Just so that we're on the same page, we don't have a water issue. We really do have a water accounting, transparency and water management issue in the Murray-Darling Basin.